Yeah, so again, just making sure you're prepared. So at camp, the spiritual side. Now, this is where we're going to differ in terms of the program and what you have control over. So if you're going to kind of a pre-planned, pre-packaged retreat, sometimes you can speak into the curriculum, as I know one of you said, sometimes you can't. But even beyond that, I found that there's ways to add to it, even when it's pre-planned and pre-packaged. So again, our summer camp, we speak into it, we hire the speaker, we dovetail it exactly to what we want. The pre-package, we're going in with some other churches. They do a great job bringing in the speaker, but I don't get to speak into the theme. And so I just try and contact them ahead of time and say, hey, can you give me the speaker's contact information? And I try and contact the speaker and kind of see exactly where they're going to go with each message. And I'm able to kind of tailor things off of that. And so at camp, there's really three big things that we've done that most of these I have resourced from Keith, aka Stolen, but in the youth ministry world, we call that resourced. So, but there's three things that we've done that have been a huge, had a huge impact that you can do regardless of the context of your retreat. So the first is one-on-ones. And Keith, you want to explain what you guys call them?
We call them intentional conversations. So what? So and the reason why we changed the name, we used to call them one-on-ones like informally, but we have a child safety policy at our church that you cannot meet with a student one-on-one behind closed doors. And so we're like, why are we calling them one-on-ones when we actually that would be breaking a policy if we if they met with a student one-on-one by themselves, like in a closed space, whatever. So we started doing intentional conversations so they can have those anywhere. They can find a place to just sit and talk privately. Yeah, so intentional conversations is what we call them.
Yeah, but while I was referencing that's good to know that you're not breaking your own policy, and so that everybody knows this is not privately, this is like in an open area one-on-one. But I was talking more so about like the spiritual, what you tell kids about going to camp for a spiritual.
Yeah, so we hopefully they know when they pull up to your church to go to camp that they're going to a church camp. And so we always tell them, hey, we shouldn't be surprised if we're checking on you spiritually. So just like you go to the doctor to have a physical, you go to a church camp to have a spiritual. So we basically ask you spiritual questions that would help us identify you, help identify where you are with the Lord and how we can help you to progress in the subsequent journey.
Yeah. So we
Is that
do
what
it.
you're talking about?
Yeah. We do these both at summer camp and winter camp. What I will say is summer camp, because it's longer for us, these conversations can tend to be a little bit more of like, hey, let's sit down by the lake, under a tree with everybody kind of doing their thing and have a conversation. Winter camp, we have to be a little bit more, hey, we're walking to an activity. Why don't let's hang back and we're going to walk and kind of follow the group. Or, hey, we're going to eat lunch, but why don't you come sit with me while we eat lunch? So winter camp, it's much more fast paced because it's over a weekend. Yours might look differently. But one thing that we do is we tell every kid, as Keith said, hey, we're going to have everybody's going to have a one-on-one conversation with either their small group leader, or if we have two leaders in a small group, we'll tell the kids who they're going to have their conversation with. And we also give the leaders the list of kids that they're going to, they're responsible for talking with. And we have a set list of questions. And we've posted those below as well. You can use your own. You can, of course, you can make your own. I've changed these throughout, but each leader gets this and they just kind of go down the list. And the cool part is we hardly ever get through all of these questions, because if you ask that first question and a kid says they're not sure or they don't think they would spend eternity with Jesus, then there's your conversation. And, through these one-on-ones, we've had many kids give their lives to Christ right then and there in the one-on-one conversation. I even remember it was really cool this past summer. I was talking with one of the students, and he wasn't a part of our ministry. He just came for camp. But we were walking around the lake, and he was an eighth grade guy. Um, and I had to explain the gospel like four times to him. Like, he had a church background, and so he's like, "Wait, okay, can you explain this to me?" And so we just kept walking, and like we just kept going. And it had just rained and it had poured, and so it was really cloudy and overcast. And at the end, he finally got the gospel, and I said, "Hey, is there anything that keeps you from trusting Christ right now?" And he was like, "No." And I was like, "Is that a decision you want to make?" He said, "Yeah." And so I said, okay, I said, well, I'll give you some time. I said, I'll kind of walk over here. I said, why don't you spend some time alone with God? And then why don't you come talk to me once you do that? And so I kind of walked away for a little bit and I wanted to take a picture, but in the spirit of, it being about the spiritual side of it, I didn't. But he was standing there with his head bowed, overlooking the lake, and all of a sudden the clouds just opened and this huge rainbow appeared. And in that moment, I knew he was praying to give his life to Christ. And so it was just really cool to see um, how God used that conversation. And so we're big on retreats. We don't have a gospel day. A lot of camps, a lot of retreats, it's like, okay, well, the night before is going to be like the gospel message. And we're always intentional. It's like, no, no, no. Like the gospel is going to be clearly presented every single day because you never know. A kid might get sick. A kid, might need, that, hey, why wait? If they trust Jesus right then and there, they can spend the rest of those days unpacking what that means. And so we always ask that first question, and then you can see the rest. We do tell kids, as you guys, I'm sure, tell your kids as well, look, not everything said here will stay here. If, there's some things that we're going to have a conversation about. And so we've also had a lot of kids share things that they know will trigger a conversation when they get home. And so if we have a kid, we've had kids share that they've been abused. We've had kids share that they're suicidal. Um, it's something we need to be prepared for because this is when kids share those things. And what I love about it is it gives them an opportunity to talk to somebody who has their undivided attention. And you think about a lot of the kids, you guys know the home lives they're coming from, that might be the only time where they talk to somebody who spiritually wants to have a conversation with them and is giving them their undivided attention. And so I've been surprised at the amount that kids have shared, even when it's a first time leader that they don't know. Like we've had kids just open book with like a leader who's just come for the first time because they know they care about them. And so you can create your own questions. You can do it however you'd like, but we've provided with a list of questions. But then another part of that is each leader who has that conversation with a student, they're responsible for filling out a card. And so they write the name of the student and their name, and they fill out the following things. And so that helps us know if there's any like authorities need to be alerted or a conversation has to have with the parents. We train our leaders ahead of time. Hey, what does that look like? And so they write that down. And then, hey, okay, maybe not automatic reporting, but based on something they shared, do we need to have a follow-up conversation? So that might be a sin struggle that the student's going through, that we need to bring parents in on, or maybe it's not even quite at that level, but just something we need to know. Maybe they share that they're struggling with another student in student ministry, and we can kind of be made aware of that. Are there any particular questions that they had that a leader needs to follow up on? So sometimes if a leader feels like a question is out of their depth, they'll put that in there, and we can kind of follow up. And then any cool wins too. So it gives us a way to celebrate what God did, and the leader to kind of know, hey, instead of me trying to remember these things, they fill it out right after they have the conversation, and then they hand me all their cards, as soon as they finish. And so it's been really helpful because then I have a stack of cards that I can go home. And what I do is on the way home, I just go through the list real quick and just look through and say, okay, hey, are there any like automatic conversations I need to have once we get back? And of course, if there's anything that we need to contact authorities, they come and let me know right then and there. But they also can write that down on the card just so we have proof of like, hey, they shared this with me. And so that is in there as well. Again, Canva template, PDF, you can take that, use that however you want. But the one-on-ones have added the biggest piece, in our camps and retreats by far. It's been really, really cool to see, and has been the biggest game changer. So if you do not do that, if you take away one thing from this entire workshop, that would be the one thing I would say. So Keith, before I move on to daily devotionals and show them their impact, do you have any more thoughts on the one-on-one? Or excuse me,
Yeah. So
intentional conversations?
conversations. Yeah. So I just want to make it clear. Well, two things that we communicate to our leaders when they're having these intentional conversations. That one, you should never promise a student that you won't tell, that you'll keep a secret, or that, because sometimes they'll say, well, hey, you promised to keep this secret. And so we've coached our leaders over the years just to kind of communicate that, so you're not breaking confidence, or you're not, just to never promise that. And you can tell them, say, hey, I can't promise that, depending on, what it is that you're going to share with me. But if it is something that has to do with, and we call them the three harms. So like, if you're harming yourself, if someone else is harming you, or if you're planning on harming someone else,
Mhm.
then yeah, we might need to bring someone else in on it for your own benefit, like for your own good. And we found that if even if you don't promise, so if a student asks you to promise not to tell anything, they're going to tell you anyways, typically. Like they're going to, whether you say yes or no, they're going to tell you because they want to tell someone. And so, so we say just never promise that you're never going to share what they're about to share with you with anyone else. And then two, that's how you can kind of know. We always tell our leaders if you're ever in doubt of when to bring in a staff member, if someone shares something with you, just say when in doubt, refer it out. So if there's ever any doubt, run it by us and we'll tell you if it needs to be reported or not. And hopefully, you have enough information where you can get some more information, or sometimes it's clarifying that there's been situations where we've had to, bring authorities in. And sometimes we had to bring parents in first and then the proper authorities, whatever, for reporting. But it depends on your local laws and maybe even your church has a policy on that. If it doesn't, I would definitely create one with your volunteer leaders. So my mentality is if I'm on a paid staff, I should be the one that's having to kind of make that call rather than like leaving that up to my volunteer leader. We've also had some volunteer leaders that are also teachers or work in the medical field, which they are considered mandatory reporters of certain things. So they had to also report it too, on top of when we notified authorities. But oftentimes camps can be an environment where students will share things, and some of those things, just over time you might learn what's appropriate, or the line where you have to report it, and things that might just be things that you need to share with your parents and the other thing that we communicate too. So sometimes there's information that's shared with a sin struggle. It's not something that's like legal or anything that we have to report. And we always encourage students to tell their parents, and we have another policy for that, or another way to kind of guideline that is we call it three tells. So we say, hey, it's important that you tell your parents this. There's a few different ways that you can do that. So if you want, I can tell your parents. So like I can just call your parents and tell them for you, and you don't have to like worry about, saying it to them. And then of course there's going to be conversations after that with them. But the initial like, telling them I can take care of that for you. We can tell them together, or you can tell them and I'll ask you about how it went. Like, or I'll be standing there with you to support you if you. And so anyway, so with that, like we've had students that have called home to apologize, after the Lord's convicted them of certain things that, that their parents didn't know about. And yeah, and we always encourage them to do it while they're at camp if they're able to, like to borrow a phone from a leader to do that if they don't have any phones with them. And it's always great to try to have them act on their conviction like right then, so that they're not like talking themselves out of it by the time they get home, and they're like, well, it's not really that big a deal. Or if that was just, the tacos that I ate that night, that's why I was really, I was feeling bad about what I did, or.
Yeah.
So we always encourage them to make phone calls even to home while they're there to confess any sin that they need to get off their chest to their parents too.
Yeah. Yeah. And we've had kids call home, some of them, their parents knew like they were struggling with, depression or things like that. And they called home just sharing like, hey, like, I'm really happy with what God's doing here. And like, he's helped me understand some things. And we've had parents like cry on the other end of the phone because, of course, they're praying for their kid as they're going away too. So that's a great opportunity as well, where you're like, hey, is there anything cool that you want to call your parents about? And that's been neat to hear that as well. So a lot that goes into that, but I highly encourage you, if there's one change you make, the one-on-ones or intentional conversations is the big one. Number two at camp is daily devotionals. At first, I was like, man, that's a lot. Um, a message, a small group, and a daily devotional. Like, is that overkill? No. We found that it's a great way to get kids to. The reason why I love it is not so much for their benefit that week, although it does help, but some of these kids might have never done. They might have never read scripture. They might have never spent time in prayer, and so we're able to really help them understand what this looks like. And so we pre-write devotionals that go in the camp student handbook and that we give out. So you can see that as well. There's a template in there. And it's just simple devotionals, like daily devotionals that they can do, that they can walk through. And it's been hugely beneficial for our students to kind of go through it and kind of spend some time alone, each day, either before the message or after the message or before small group or after small group to either prepare or to kind of apply what they have heard. And then lastly, at camp, this is something we did this past summer, which is my favorite part of camp. And you can do it so many different ways, but we wanted to show them their impact. So we've had so many kids take risks for Christ or step out in faith, and we wanted to show them, how God had used them. And so one of the ways that we did this is the last night of camp. It was very spontaneous. We weren't planning on doing it, but I kind of had the idea during the final message, and it was small group time, and I just kind of was like, it's day 4, like everybody has already probably shared everything in small group. I just want them to see, and we walk out, and there's an awesome sunset by the lake, and so I just told them all, hey, come with me. And we sat down. I didn't tell them what I was doing. I told my leaders, on the way. And I just asked them, I said, hey, raise your hand if you've trusted Christ in the past year. And, we had about, I don't know, out of our group of 80 students or 85 students, we had probably 25 hands go up. And so we just asked, like, once they raised their hand, we said, hey, who here helped you make that decision or, influenced you to trust Christ? And as they said their name, we told them to go stand off to the side with that person. And we kept going, and they kept saying different names, and they would go stand by themselves. And then we went to the kids still sitting, and we said, hey, who here has really invested in you or discipled you? And they said a student's name or a leader's name. And if they were already standing a part of a group, we told them to go stand with them. And if they didn't, then they started a new group. And so we kept doing that till everybody had a group. And then we told them that, as they were standing with their groups, that this was their spiritual family tree. And, one of the things we do as a family is we take family pictures. And so we walked around, and each group took a family picture. And that was really cool. We ended up having 9 spiritual families amongst our group. And they got to see those pictures. And some of them were much more eclectic than this one. But it was very cool to see that they could kind of connect the dots of this person led me to Christ, but they also led this person to Christ, or I led this person to Christ, and then they led this person to Christ. And it was just really, really cool. And so you can do that a lot of different ways. If you don't have time or the space to do that, we also created a worksheet that they can do, and it walks them through as well to help them understand. So you can even do that quietly by themselves, but you can do it so many different ways. But I think it's also a great time to celebrate what God has done, and that's a huge way to do that. And so while you're at camp, one-on-ones or intentional conversations, daily devotionals, and show them their impact are huge steps.